and there's no symbolism in Paul being so. I just said, mate, they're your papers, and I've got my questions for you. So I just want to be close. No. Saskia around here too. Hey, look, welcome, folk, and Sally. I know you're there, but I can't see you, which is a bit.
Yeah.
You can't see me?
Just working on it with Sarah. She's
Okay.
sending.
There we are, Sally. I think we can just about see you in some way, but it's
Choosing
good.
to go up there at the moment. But
What's it like?
Lots of issues today.
Yeah, you're in Christchurch, are you, Sally?
I'm in Christchurch. Yeah.
Yeah. What's it like up there?
It was pretty fresh this morning. Yeah. But it's a beautiful day. Absolutely stunning.
It's paradise down here too.
Great.
Right. Look, let's make a formal start to the meeting. Welcome to the meeting. It's the really an extraordinary meeting, isn't it? Rather, I mean, it is just a normal meeting of the committee, but we've got here really primarily one task, which is around recommending to council that this, or rather, I don't know whether we're recommending or in effect we are just saying this is really to go to the auditors in effect. I think it's the primary work, but we will do a couple of other bits around it. So it is a formally constituted meeting. We have an apology from Tracy. So I'll move from the chair that will sustain it. Thank you, Tamar. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. It's carried. Public forum, haven't got anybody from the public as far as I'm aware. Saskia, nobody's asked to come. That's cool. We got the minutes of the last meeting, 14 Feb. We had a couple of really quick ones, didn't we? And it feels like a break. So I'll move from the chair. We've taken to the correct record. Thank you, Tamar. Any corrections or matters of accuracy to note? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. I don't think there's any actions arising from that, Saskia, was there at this stage? We're comfortable things are on the go, and I mean, we knew we were going into a period where it was all about the LTP and CD, so that is where we're at. Declarations of interest. Mine is out of date, Sarah, so I need to send you an updated schedule. For what it's worth, I'm no longer involved with Watomo, Tauranga, or what was the third one? There were three on here that I need to know. Let me just send you the updated version anyway. Actually, at the end, I marked them off. What were they? Oh, in the cargo. No longer in the cargo. It's not. I don't think any of that's relevant to today's proceedings, but if we'll just note that, that would be good. That gets to the substantive items, which is both the Audit New Zealand report on the CD. Grateful, Saskia, that we've got that here. It's an interim phase between now and the final audit, so I think it's worthwhile just spending a few moments on that. And then we've actually got the LTP. So, Anand, is either you, Paul, or you, Saskia, want to lead us off on the actual management report? Or anybody else actually in the room that needs to talk to him.
Thank you for that.
Bruce, please.
Sorry, Bruce.
Yeah, please.
Old habits, don't
Boss is a better word, but no, Bruce is okay.
We thought it important to present this to the Audit and Risk Committee before finalising it with Audit New Zealand. So this has not gone to Audit New Zealand.
Right. Okay.
So this is for your input. I think on the face of it is a very pleasing report. There were very few items that the auditors, from a financial perspective, brought up. There were a couple of changes that they wanted us to think about and make in the infrastructure strategy, and I've talked with both Julie and QP in the roading space to make those changes. So we will do those things, and they're cosmetic stuff. There's nothing in what they're asking for. I don't think that fundamentally changes the outcome. The big thing for us was, and I think that delivering an unmodified opinion has been very good for the business, but there were a couple of matters of emphasis. especially around the three waters. That has caused us no end of grief trying to account for it and budget for it, given its uncertainty. So, and it did involve the audit director actually producing some journals, which I don't think audit directors do very, very often.
Not these days.
So the auditors were very, very helpful in getting this thing across the line. The fact that the LTP and Southern Water done well could have potentially caused us some issues if Southern Water done well differed from what we consulted on with the LTP, but we've kind of covered that off, and we will produce an LTP based on the consultation document, and any changes that come out of Southern Water done well consultation, which will occur in July, solves our problem of the uncertainty issue, because we're working on the best information we have available at the time, and council decisions around that. So for the input, or sorry, the stuff that the auditors wanted us to change, and they brought to our attention, I think there's not much in it, and I'm pretty comfortable with the outcome of the CD for it.
Brilliant. Okay, look, that's really useful, and thank you for putting the context that we're seeing this in draft. With obviously once it's been considered by us, you'll then go back to Chantal and take it forward. So there are a couple of good matters in here. I think that's worthwhile to discuss. But before I make any comments, Tamar, Sarah, Sally, are there any matters you'd like to raise in this report?
Paul says the challenges around water and.
Yeah, well, look, perhaps it's a good place just to kick off. I know this is public, but I'll say it because it's all public that I'm talking about. I said to you, Tamar, I just wanted to come to a council where things are just normal and good. And Peter, I understand they are. Tamar's done her best to disabuse me of that. But I want to reflect, Paul, this is the third 9-year plan I've looked at, and the other two are South Wairarapa and Waipā, both of which I chair, and we have received adverse opinions. So it's nice to look at something that appears to be running down a track of minimum plus with the auditors. So I'm interested, because clearly this is both we've consulted with, and you will go out, you're looking to finalise your LTP with 3 waters out from, I think it's 28, 29, whatever.
First July 2027.
Yeah, 27, yes, it'll be. You just mentioned that there are possible differences between your best information now with the 3 waters out and where you might land with Southern Waters done well. I've got the right name? Southern?
Yep, Southern Water done well.
This is WDW.
Done moderately well.
Done.
Any sense of where, what would be this? So, I mean, obviously, your other consultation over Southern Waters done well, etc., is what you're saying to give rise to the adjustments. Have you got any sense where those differences could fall? I'm not suggesting that we try and anticipate it, but I'm just wondering, I've looked at this, I've seen your numbers go out, where could the difference arise?
I think what we saw on the LTP was, if you put the 3 options together, the majority of people came down. There was a good chunk of support for a CCO of some description.
Yeah.
It was probably like 45-55%. Not quite the deviation that Selwyn District Council had, which was 85% against.
Okay, I didn't realise that.
Against a CCO.
Yeah.
They chose to go down the CCO pathway. So ours was a lot closer. If there was a difference, it could be in the nature of the CCO.
Yeah.
Because I think most chief executives in small councils would struggle to attest to the water services development plan if it was an in-house business unit, because it just doesn't really stack up, and they have to be able to sign the dotted line and attest that this is they can deliver this plan. So yeah, it's probably in that where there'd be, but just looking at the consultation that we've received thus far, it's 2/3 in support of a joint CCO. So what we're seeing come through at the moment, not that they're big numbers, 40 odd ish, the majority is in favour of a joint CCO.
So I mean, I think the difference is so the differences you're talking about is if it doesn't go to a joint CCO, goes to something different.
In terms of the CD,
Yeah.
we couched the questions
Yeah,
quite broadly,
Yeah,
so
that's right.
because we didn't really have a view on what the numbers might look like for a CCO at the time. That work hadn't been done.
yeah,
So it was a CCO of some description, be it a single CCO or a joint. So we've gone down that track. I think the auditor's concern was we went out with a preferred option, and then the Southern Waters Done Well went out with its options,
Mhm.
and then the council decided at its deliberations that no, it didn't want the CCO anymore. It wanted to go back to a in-house, which then puts the two consultations kind of diametrically opposed. So that was their main concern. I think that getting it, if the decision is post-July that the council decides it doesn't want a CCO, I think it's highly unlikely, but if they decide not to, we would have produced an LTP based on the information that we knew at 30 June. What that would probably mean would be an amendment to our LTP to bring it back into line.
that's right.
That gives the auditors a clearer path to issue an opinion based on the best information at the time, and then we can adjust if that changes. So that was where they were coming from. How do we record and account for all of that?
Yes, okay. It's not, because it struck me in your comments that looking at it, I mean, if you move to a CCO option, whether it's individual CCO or multi council, the adjustments that you are reflecting in the LTP that we get to consider, but is on the next paper, would have the same level of debt removed, would still have the same impact on the P&L, etc. So it's not as if the numbers could change.
No,
it's actually just more. Yeah, I mean, that, by the way, out of interest thing I've mentioned by far and South Wye was the real problem, was actually we had some arguments. We didn't want to impair the consultation that you are having in a separate on it's another story and not our fight here. We're certainly doing this consistent with GAP. So we should have a favourable view from the auditors. Right, so the key issue is your consultation running in parallel in effect or coming post-July may come up with a different answer, which has that impact rather than necessarily the dollars and cents is going to change as we have them separately. Okay, that's really helpful. Just then, seeing probably I did have a few questions. I'm conscious that in this sort of meeting, you guys have probably all had these questions and gone through them, but I'll ask them for what it's worth. I'd like to come back to the balanced budget. Why don't we deal with that now, because it's going to come up under the LTP. They all reference to the uncertainty over land sales to balance your budget. Well, actually, let's just deal with that. They're really saying, how do you know you're going to get the land sales, or rather, how strong are the assumptions behind it? Sort of, you'd probably kick that one to death, but just give me a sense of how you've gone there.
I think they're very jumping from a technical point of view. But we're already having unsolicited approaches for our land, and to such an extent that we're having to slow down some of that to make sure we don't outpace our community board and council's thinking on that. So last year we didn't achieve a balanced budget because we didn't make the land sales. I think there's the potential that we could sell more land, but we just have to. We don't want to flood the market either.
No, we want to make certain you get the best price.
So there's definitely a lot of nibbles out there, and so we have a really high degree of confidence, and we've sort of moved on in our thinking. So we're now at the stage that we're actually wanting to develop the land, because whereas perhaps 12 months ago we weren't at that development stage.
And I can add to that, Bruce. So had a meeting with our consultants. David and I, and we are going to bring the plan for the Bannockburn Road subdivision to the next two board meetings. So it is definitely progressing. And as Peter says, colliers are indicating that there is interest in the market out there. So we are looking both the land strategy and the initial sort of how we're going to approach it, sort of plan with CCB in June.
So you've got a stronger level of confidence is what I'm hearing. given this is a draft report, are you going to go back to them and say, we are more strong in our views that our assumption is reasonable? Because they have modified it. Sorry, they haven't modified it, sorry. They have used an emphasis of matter in their opinion to say, hey, look at this assumption. We want to get land sales on the door. And they're saying that's uncertain. Do we want to push back and say, you need to come back and look at this properly again because we're more confident?
It's still a level of uncertainty as to what the market's going to do, the investment required by Three Waters and how fast Julie's team's going to be able to deliver on that, as well as all the other demands in Three Waters. So while we're moving at pace to work with Colliers and to get a plan to the community board, I think there's still a lot of market forces at play there, demands on the Three Waters network as to when everything could be scheduled. So I'm feeling okay with that emphasis of matter. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I looked at it from a point of view, and they did ask us to change year 8 and 9, I think, because they didn't believe that we could achieve those levels of sales. And you know, it's great that the auditors are now real estate experts, to be fair. I don't know if that's publicly, but I guess that's the frustrating point. We have had consultants who are skilled at what they do, lay out our plan, and that is what we have accepted. And really, we changed the last couple of years just to stop this being snagged on land sales. I'm actually confident that by this time in 2 years' time, we would have proved them well wrong, and we would be well and truly on the way. So I think it's, I think it could be worth a comment to say that we do have a greater degree of confidence. It's not going to change the emphasis of matter. It might help with the final audit for the LTP when they look at it and say, okay, yeah, we get that. So that could be something we should put in.
Look, I don't want to create work, so I'm sort of not personally, Tamar, I'm not over the exercise by this on the basis that, you know, an emphasis matter is actually quite a useful tool on their part. I don't actually have trouble with them saying, hey, look, land sales are important to us. But I just wondered whether, in fact, they, you know, you'll do it normally anyway. I would assume they will relook at that assumption, and you will have a discussion with them during the course of the audit. But hey, look, guys, this is a question, you know. We've got better signs than actually you may be aware of. Whether that modifies their view, who knows? Because I hear your point, it's land sales across the 10 years, and that clearly gets more uncertain the further you go on. Okay, so we're not suggesting any sort of critique, criticism, pushback on that. That's cool. There was a reference, which probably, if I probably read this too quickly, but on page 23, the council intends to account for agency fees, which at this stage are not incorporated in the forecasts.
That's in relation to what happens post 1 July 2027. Okay, and whether there's any revenue, or whether what the agreement is in terms of back office work for billing, rating, collecting revenue, that sort of thing. So that hasn't been talked about or decided. So we haven't put anything in for that. I would expect it would be something along the lines of an ECAN type model where they used to, I don't know whether they do now, but all of the councils within Canterbury used to collect rates on behalf of ECAN, and they used to pay an agency fee. So whether that's going to happen or not, we decided that we wouldn't put anything in for that.
Right. It's probably marginal to the outcome.
Well, again, that would depend on, you know, if we're talking $20 million in revenue overall, and it's 2%, that is, you know, $400,000. So sorry, that's 1%.
You're right, I shouldn't sneeze there, should I?
No. But I guess the problem for us is that is so uncertain because we haven't even got to the point that we're setting this thing up.
So in the letter, so I'm at page 23, they then go into options 1 and 2, Is that about agency fees or is that more about the total transaction and how we account for the total transaction?
I think
So
that's the total transaction.
yeah. There could have been more clarity. If I'm only asking how they edited this because they've written what they know and it means a lot to them. But as a cold read, I had some trouble getting from that paragraph around agency fees to option 1 and 2. But that's me just being slightly picky. Okay, and so we're comfortable that we've got because it is a significant and it does start to affect. I took me a moment to tweak why we had in the disclosure statements in the LTP that significant was 27% decrease in rates or something.
Yeah.
So it looks really hot, but let's not get too worried about that. We'll come back to that. So in effect, we're comfortable with that. We have agreed with the auditors the basic. Well, you said possibly they gave us the entries.
Yeah.
The entries to remove the waters.
Yes, what we were attempting to do was not get a qualification based on the fact that we didn't comply with generally accepted accounting principles. So the auditors and our team worked really hard to get that across the line.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, we've dealt with land sales. It comes up there again, so I think I'm probably fine there. And Julie, thank you for being here. Poor old Julie ran into me at the cafe, so I said you will be at the meeting. She thought she was going to have an easy day. Look, I just noted the whole bridge thing, and I've asked Julie perhaps when we get to the LTP, just give me a quick sense of where the infrastructure strategy's at. But I mean, these guys focus a bit here around the bridges and what have you, and I've seen that inside the LTP as well. So I don't actually have too much trouble as far as that's concerned. The only other thing then, Paul, the inflation use for personnel costs, they didn't seem to ultimately have a problem, although they did say they saw this what as a misstatement.
They've treated it as a misstatement, but the council and the executive ultimately have the ability to set the level. So we've used a projected level for year 1 that isn't built.
Yeah.
And then we picked up I think we've used a similar rate going forward because it sits with the chief executive and to determine that. And I think that's already there's been a determination or will be soon about what that might be for next year. So, but it's not the bill number, and we thought to save us some, let's put it accurate. Best information is really the key thing rather than actually best information, I suppose, by definition would be better accuracy. Okay, cool. Look, and then back to the infrastructure strategy, Julie. This is one area where we do actually have a draft management comment in place. Was there any particular disclosure issues with the infrastructure strategy?
No, so we've made all the changes to the infrastructure strategy now that they've asked for, which they're pretty minor, really.
Yeah.
Any brand issues?
Yeah, it's obviously been a key focus, to be honest, and can I should be careful how I generalise. It's some level of frustration because it sort of came out of the blue, and I've seen a number of infrastructure strategies held up because of particular disclosure requirements. Oh, I won't. I'm actually not prepared to say until outside the meeting.
So what there was a focus on, they did talk to me a lot about the big projects, and it was challenging for the auditors because in the finances we only had 2 years of financials, but then the infrastructure strategy. So when they were looking at the big projects that were in year 1 and 2, they're only seeing maybe the first year of a 6-year project.
Yes, exactly.
To give them a lot of background information around how the total cost, how that total cost had been calculated, the consultants' reports and the business cases relating to those, and then how I had broken those cash flows down into different years. So luckily, when I had done the budgets, I had saved all that info for the calcs that I could show them, and then they were happy with that.
Yeah,
it did go down quite a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, it is an oddity. It does strike me as an oddity, and I mean, I have particular views about this LTP, which are not relevant to express today. But why do we have a 30-year strategy with them in and an LTP with some out, the infrastructure strategy isn't supporting the LTP. I'll be honest,
No.
my personal view.
No, and look, to be honest, Bruce, we put a lot of effort into the first 10 years of the plan because we have had so much change happening in terms of who's delivering this and then the drivers of those organisations and the constraints of those organisations that, you know, we had a plan for the National Transition Unit. We then redid that for our council within their funding envelope, and then we're looking at it again now with the CCO with a higher debt ceiling. So there's been 3 different iterations that I've had to do, and the water services delivery plans have to be for a 10-year plan. So the real focus has been around the 10-year plan, and everything that we couldn't deliver within the 10-year plan basically got just pushed out. We haven't revisited in detail year 11 to year 30. And the auditors didn't really look at that, to be honest, either. So, and you'll see there is a bit of a blip in year 11 because things like Clyde's wastewater reticulation got pushed out, you know, so things that were in the initial 10 years got pushed out because I had to keep within a bit of a funding envelope for this council in case it wasn't our plan. So we've aimed for a and the reality is we can probably deliver $30 million of CapEx a year once we're up and ramped up and running. But beyond 30 million is a struggle.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I look at it this way. You're quite right. Your water service delivery plan is where all the action is now. But if we think about it strategically, the existing 30-year strategy you have, at least as an indicator, what we as a council have to expect to get out of the water company in terms of maintaining services. I mean, you talk about servicing the subdivisions. Come 1 July 27, we're going to have an agreement or negotiate with the water company that they actually do deliver services to enable land sales.
So our program at the moment, our work program is always dealing with the regulates first, but then and getting through the end financial year, LTP, our work programs out the next financial year, and then we will start actually on the next asset management plan and a more robust 30-year plan, because there is, you know, all these plans are based on the information we had at the time of producing them. We were producing this around October last year. Since then, the new wastewater performance standards have landed for consultation. We expect them to be implemented in around October when the legislation is adopted. So that will change this program. We also have hydraulic models that are due in with us around September that will have a big influence on the growth projects and the timing of those. So we will have to redo our capital programs to factor in that extra info. And we've also just received information. We've just had Beaker in to do reviews of the concrete reservoirs, which will change some of the ones we thought we would have to do. We can actually delay some that we didn't have and we're going to have to do sooner. So the program's as good as it can be at a point in time.
Yes. Don't find some of the information too quickly though.
No.
So technically, if we know before 30 June or when you've got them,
I don't want to get submitted the report by then.
I'm sure I haven't heard those last few statements you made to me, so.
We're not there yet to be able to nail down what the cost would even be, Bruce. So, you know, we will start again and it will be October, we'll be producing the next 30-year one, and I would say that that'll be a more robust 30-year plan. And I think council does need that asset management plan and the 30-year plan for the transition into the CCO.
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, we're going to have to be a smart purchaser. So that makes a ton of sense to me. Okay, that's really helpful. That then gets me, Paul, to the final section, which is the audit of the final LTP. It's just basically saying, Paul, do your work and we'll do our work. I think that's the right. I've read it, which is fair enough. Is there anything out of the CD audit or its related work or even our discussion that you're taking into account that you've got to deal with in terms of the getting through the finalisation of the LTP and indeed the audit?
From a CD perspective, no, we put all of the changes that were required through into the supporting documentation at the time, so the financials were updated. The issue now is the council deliberated on Tuesday. And we have a whole bunch of changes now that have come out of that that we're working on putting into the financials. We have a draft CD, a draft LTP, which we've got as part of the agenda. So what we're anticipating is it's going to be kind of a lift and paste type scenario into the LTP. We've done most of the work around the wording.
So logically, your numbers are going to be finalised, but what you're really saying is they're finalised out of the deliberation process and decisions you've made is in contrast to there being sort of some fundamental upheaval that will occur with this LTP. So just remind me, you plan to adopt the LTP on what date?
We've scheduled 2 dates. We've scheduled the normal council.
Come on, Paul, give me one date, mate. I'm only interested in one day.
Aspiration.
It's going to be between the 25th and the 30th.
25th and 30th,
For the 25th.
Being the council day. But we always have a backup at the last date.
So we've got the auditors.
We've all got the last minute.
Who's committed resources,
Yep, auditors are in on Monday.
This Monday,
Yes, and they're, although they're starting work on Monday, I think they're working from their offices on Monday, and then they're in for 2 weeks the following week, so after King's birthday.
And we've got to catch up with Chantal and her team at 1 o'clock this afternoon as well, just to work through the next few weeks.
There'll still be a meeting here at Saskia. What's the story? No, that's fine. That's fine. You would be well and truly. Hey, that's good. Well done. Seriously, you guys, I've done all the talking, which is pretty obvious, but is there anything else that you guys or Sally would like to raise in light of perhaps my comments? No?
No, I don't think so.
We're all good?
We just have a couple of things that might trip us up.
Good, tell us, please.
Sally's involved in one of them around the Roxburgh pool, so if we can get the sign off for that, then we're good to go. And the other one is that we didn't think about this on Tuesday, which is the reduction in water volumetric charges to $1.60 for year one will mean that all of the activities that use water from a council perspective will reduce their rate requirement. And that's a saving of about $277,000. So we may sneak in our rates rise under 12.
Yes.
So.
Yes, but I mean,
you didn't think about that on the day.
Bottom line point for you is that when you do those sorts of changes, they go right throughout your LTP. You need to think through.
Well, that change only occurs in year one because we've signalled in year two it moves back up to $2.40, and then year three because it's a water volumetric charge, it's out of the business. So,
that's right.
But that's something we didn't think about.
So that just raises questions on, I put it roughly around, project management, project risk. You folk have enough time. I mean, with the auditors coming in, you folk have enough time to do a good product before these guys have to adopt on the 25th to the 30th of June. Who sits back? Have you got somebody that can sit back and do that not cold review, because it can't, I'm thinking of you or you, Saskia, that actually just checks the logic we have, the sort of thing that you've talked about with volumetric charges. Have you got time to do that properly?
Yeah, so we are a wee bit push in the next few days just to get the critical stuff ready for audit, and we'll also need to get all the information for Te Koroai ready as well. But we will come up for brief about the end of next week. That we'll be able to actually sit down. And Sally, thank you very much for sending through that document. The typos, apologies for that. We will get it professionally proofread as well at the end. We are not seeing our mistakes for the life of us now.
When you're working 20 hours a day, it's understandable.
So yes, definitely, Paul and I have, given that we have got to where we have with council on Tuesday and we met that date, and with the conversation today, I'm feeling confident that we will get everything ready come Monday for audit, and that we will get a slight, the team will still be busy, but Paul and I will probably have a bit more capacity towards the end of next week just to sit down and really just make sure we're feeling confident with everything running through.
The only exception I will say to that is the council are considering its variable charge versus its UAGC type charge. They're considering that on Wednesday, and that was part of the rating FIS,
Yeah.
which goes into the LTP, but that's the last thing that we need to do. And I think that we've slotted an hour in the agenda for that, so it should be a good discussion to get us to a position where we know what the UAGC is, we know what the general rate is, we know what the community facilities fixed targeted rate will be compared to the variable targeted rate, and we can then finish the rating part of it.
Sounds like a good robust debate. UAGC versus.
Been coming for a while. Yeah, that does need to be addressed.
And the other thing we do have an issue with is we're just that much below the 30% cap, which it's okay, but it's living dangerously, I think. So we've got to look at that as well.
Okay. So look, I mean, my concern here is just that, it sounds like a good relationship with the auditors. I'm glad about that, and I don't want us professionally to be in the position where we're relying on them to pick up our mistakes. I'd rather we had even though they're in, we have the chance, Saskia, to do our own review, our own thinking, have we got this right? So that we can, we're doing our planning part. Okay, that's really cool.
Hey, Saskia, can I just ask a quick question, Saskia? So you know how we moved all of the at the meeting on Tuesday, we moved each item individually, moved and seconded it. Did we have that detailed so that we didn't catch ourselves like we did last year when we did the annual plan and we missed something? Remember?
So that's separate. So the rates resolution, actually, we probably could talk about the rates resolution process today.
Oh, this is June.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the reason for doing it separately was in terms of any conflicts, or if councillors wanted to vote against a certain motion rather than take it as a whole. So that was the rationale for breaking it down. But if we go back to our annual plan, when we had to get in legal advice, as we probably all recall that, and we had an inconsistency in the rates resolution, that comes in June. And what Paul and I are proposing, again, in terms of, the team working pretty hard and making sure we get it right, is that we adopt, fingers crossed, on the 25th. So we're adopting on the 25th, and there's a separate, very short meeting. We will go through the rates resolution. We need to probably sit with Sarah and obviously work with yourself to set that meeting, where we will actually break down all the resolutions or the rates on the advice that we got. And actually, so it's going to be quite a long rating resolution this time around. So rather than adopt and then do that at the same time. Yeah.
So if I can add to that, the rates resolution will not refer to a document. What the rating resolution will have is it will have council agrees to set the general rate at, and that will be effectively a cut and paste out of the FIS in the LTP straight into a resolution that the council, and it will end up being 3 or 4 pages long probably. And what councillors tend to do is they'll start reading it and say we've received the report, and then we start and then say, oh, I'll go A, B, C, D right the way through, because that is where we tripped up last time. We had an appendix document that we were referring to that wasn't the right. Whereas on the advice of Jonathan Salter, and it is common, this is how I've experienced it, is you take and make the resolution all of the rates so that you're resolving each one.
But then make sure when it's
it is, but it then matches back, and we can check it back to the LTP. It's the right numbers. Getting resolved, so we don't find that problem again.
And given our experiences with audit, we often run right to the very end, just getting the audit signed off, so that we don't make mistakes, hence the additional meeting. But you never know, if this goes swimmingly and we've got capacity and time and we're feeling confident that we can get it right and rush it, we would put it up on the 25th, but just signalling that it's likely to be separate. short meeting.
And just make certain that it's
Yeah.
not just the rates, but that, your penalty dates and
All that.
installment dates, etc.
Charges.
are all right.
And the
Because
other,
that trips you up as much as getting the rate wrong.
Absolutely.
and the other thing in relation to that, we are looking to do an additional water read round, so that all needs to be factored in. Julie's bringing that in-house, so there's been a bit of work going on in that, so I'm not sure we'll get there on the 25th, and I forget the date by which we have to have that meeting. It's by the second week of July.
Yeah, if we were going to move the rates resolution and keep it separate, the last date we could have is about the 13th of July.
Yeah, I've got one council that's, I think that they can go to the 18th of July, and they need to for various reasons which aren't relevant here. But we get the 18th of July as the drop dead date. Get the first instalment out.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
good. Okay, well, that's really helpful then, thank you. So look, I think in terms of, and thank you for that, Sally, I think then in terms of that, what we can do with this resolution is I just think we keep it simple, but I just think we should insert the word draft in front of the report, given it is in that situation. So I think the recommendation is that the draft report be received. I don't think anything else from there, but obviously you'll follow this through with the order to get it clear with Chantel. It doesn't feel like you're going to make any changes, certainly from our comments today, other than our chance to understand it, which is really important. So we prepared to move it. Thank you. Appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you, Tana. I'll put the motion that we receive the draft report. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Those against? Carried. Brilliant. Yeah, that's really helpful, and well done, guys, it's a pretty good report out of those, which is superb. Right, so we get to the actual. How many times have you guys read this long-term plan?
Too many.
Why the hell is Robertson here making you read it again, eh? Okay, right. That's well. What I'd actually propose to, I think I will at some point towards the end, we'll just sort of not go through page by page, perhaps not even section by section, but one quick wrap up. But what I would like to do personally, my questions are based around just ensuring strategically that LTP is doing what we want it to do. I've got some simple questions. Well, what did you hear, Paul? Just some simple questions. I tend to think more about that. Having said that, we don't have to spend a lot of time on that because I do recognise does the whole document meet our needs, meet our test, because we want to actually literally just give it to the audience do your best. So I don't want to unduly complicate it. But if it's okay with you, I'd just like to look at some of the big picture things, and that's where, Julie, I thought it would be really helpful if you just gave us, given who we are, a lot of our cost, both operationally but also CapEx, is actually driven by our infrastructure matters. So I think if you could just give us your 2-minute snapshot, if we could do it with some reference to what's actually in the LTP, that would be good. Because I just want to make certain, you folk, that we are comfortable with the story, okay? Because it then drives into the dollars. So I think I'm just looking here. It's a sort of sense and sensibility check without it being too long.
So high level, I think our key focus is in the earlier parts of this plan are around compliance.
Yeah.
And meeting our legal obligations. The other big driver is growth. And I've heard the DIA refer to growth for the councils and the water service delivery plans that they've been looking at as being a silent killer for those councils that have high growth. And I have to say it is. And when we're starting to feel the reverberations of growth right across the program now. And you used to be able to accommodate capacity and think ahead. Now we're almost got the developers planning ahead of our plan, which means our plan is starting to be reactive in terms of where we're doing infrastructure upgrades.
Understand. Okay, yeah. Then you get that right. What you're really saying is from a prior growth, it's been more about can we fit this within the existing capacity of our current infrastructure, whereas now
and so
infrastructure-wise, you have to think about actually how do you augment your existing systems.
So when we're upgrading treatment plants and things like that, we're building them for future growth.
Yeah.
Whereas now what we're seeing is parts of the network being developed where we don't have network capacity, pipe capacity, or they're pushing to do growth, or growth is going faster than what we had perhaps anticipated in pockets, which means treatment projects are barely in time to keep up.
Yeah, I think I read it, was it somewhere, was it
And
about
it's-
Road, for instance, you were
Yeah.
worried about its capacity, its capability to deliver, yeah.
Yeah, so Alexandria's wastewater treatment plant's been key there as
Okay.
well. So, the other thing is so there's the compliance really dominates the first few years. The growth kind of is sitting in behind that in the next few years. There's growth being built into those compliance projects, but the growth projects will kick in largely following through years. There's a couple in the first few years where we're really like out Bannockburn and that we're having some challenges. And then the next thing I think that's kind of a big thing in there is that financial sustainability and the fact that going forward, our investment in renewals needs to meet the life cycle needs of the assets. Now, that probably is where the bridge thing kicks in, where there was a number of years where in the road space, we fully funded depreciation for roads, but we did not fund depreciation for bridges, which with the benefit of hindsight wasn't a good idea, given that you've got long life assets coming to the tail end of their life. It would have been good for them putting away, but it's always that balance with rates increases. So I think and then sitting beneath that is sort of the resilience part of things, and I always call climate and seismic is part of that resilience bubble, because for a few years there, everything was on focus on seismic, and now then it's shifted to climate, and we still need to not lose sight of that seismic resilience in there as well. So, and then the other thing is that sort of sitting below again is community expectations relating to levels of service for accessibility, and then the comfort and aesthetic parts of our infrastructure. So in roads, that's the roughness of the gravel roads, the roughness of the sealed roads, how many potholes, and the water space, that's the taste of the water. So we've got Omakaw water treatment plant in there for an upgrade. It's a lower priority because it actually has a protozoa barrier. It's not a fully compliant protozoa barrier, but it's not on the water regulators' radar for giving us a good kick at the moment. But the community out there think it's number one priority because of taste, and we get more public complaints about Omakaw's water than we move around in Edinburgh, which don't have any protozoa barriers on them. So the community's expectation versus compliance are not aligned here. And that's a challenging story for us to tell. Why are we doing Ranford and Patio Road when we don't get complaints about them at the same level that we do around, say, Omakaw or Naseby? So, and certainly in the roading sector, they've got that with accessibility around the bridges. They're going to have challenges with the communities going forward around the reality of financial sustainability and what you replace versus some locals' expectations around still having that bridge defect.
So I mean, I was interested in the bridges. I mean, in effect, we're going to lower the level of service.
Yes, you are, but then I think if you look back.
I don't mean there's a challenge or need to be, but I mean, I think the implication of what, $9.8 million in the budget versus the need for 20 for the initial bridges must mean we're going to be posting or closing bridges where there is relative accessibility elsewhere.
There's other options for access. There's a detour available, and so I think you were building bridges. Some of those bridges are at nearing 100-year life. Think what transport options were 100 years ago versus today.
Built for a horse and cart. It's not a tanker over the trailer.
And so down the Ida Valley, for example, every creek and every crossroad across the Ida Valley has a bridge on it now. Does every road need to go all the way through, or could you take out every second one?
Interesting. Interesting.
And then I think that we are providing capacity for growth in the new assets, but these assets have more than 50 years life in them. So there's a balance between building capacity in now, when we're building them, for growth that you won't need maybe 10, 20, 30 years. So where we can, we're building it to be able to add on. And examples of that would be, we build the buildings big enough to put more reps of membranes in, but we don't put membranes in initially, but infrastructure is there to support them when they do go in, or we've built 2 bores now, but another bore will be getting built in future years. So they are the 100% growth projects. Which is obviously the 20 million that's needed. We've got 9.8 in. Wastewater performance standards is going to move things around in the future, but we have budgeted we have taken a bit of a conservative approach, non-conservative approach, I'd say, and that we had assumed that a discharge to water would be provided for in the future, and that's what we budgeted for. We didn't put in the discharge to land option, which would have been about the difference was 108 million to around the 36 million that's in there. So quite a big difference there. But in saying that, there will be some swapping around. Omakau, we can probably build something for a lower cost and continue a discharge to the river, but we are going to have to invest at Ranfurly, which we hadn't probably anticipated back then. And Cromwell's probably going to need more spend on it than we had anticipated. So I think it's just going to balance out overall in the future. I think that partially funded depreciation on waters, it's something we can do now, but it's going to have to be readdressed again in 2028 as part of the financial sustainability test. And as I said before, we focused on year 1 to 10 and not years 11 to 30 in the water space. I think the road and 30-year plan would be more robust than the 3 waters plan. And we have done things like pushed out the next stages of Clyde's wastewater expansion of water into the Dunstan Flats area to keep within that sort of funding cap we had put on ourselves. And in the stormwater space, the big things there really is we do know we're going to have an increasing regulation coming in there. There's a national performance standard coming for stormwater, and the indications we have had, and that is in the legislation now, is that we will have to do catchment management plans for all the stormwater networks. So we've budgeted for that, and we've also allowed to build hydraulic models for Alexandra and Cromwell so that we can better manage the growth of patients of stormwater in those catchments. But largely stormwater is following the depreciation profile that would be there if we were fully funding depreciation.
Okay. That's really helpful. I don't want to put you to the test, but I'm really looking at my colleagues. Does that sound familiar? It makes sense. I suspect it's what you've been talking about all the way through in terms of planning how that infrastructure strategy plays out. It certainly seems pretty consistent from my quick read of the infrastructure strategy, which I've quite enjoyed, to be honest. I enjoyed particularly the prioritisation, which is back to your point that you made about aesthetics, etc. Over so it does actually, it did actually, when I started to think about the numbers, create an interesting challenge, because as you said, you've got a 30-year strategy here, but the numbers are only here for 2 years, which sort of then threw out of whack all my thinking around financial sustainability. But that doesn't matter. That you obviously deal with that through the water service delivery plan.
We had actually done we'd definitely done 10 years in the finance system before we dropped it out. So it was all in there, and we did a drop out of it before it was removed, so that we had it to put back in if we needed to. And I did end up providing the 10 years to the auditors because they couldn't see the picture otherwise. And when they had that 10 years, they could see that things lined up, which you haven't had the privilege of having, so we've been out of it.
Okay, that's really interesting. So how's that affect the financial strategy, Paul?
I think it's my answer is going to be it's the same statements that we made when we met to consider the draft CV. What it does is obviously it gives us the ability, I think, beyond year 2 to actually start focusing on other parts of business, given that we were projecting Three Waters was going to start to eat well into our debt capacity, and has forced us to, or would have forced us to to get a credit
Mm.
rating. Given that we now have that and we will have a bit of capacity, I think that gives us the opportunity to start looking at things like the roading space where we're looking at year 2 as effectively being a reset for our for council in terms of what we do, how we do it, how we rate for it.
Yes, it makes me, as an aside, wonder about the years 3 to 9. Is that what they're going to look like? I think personally, no. Because I mean, actually, I meant to say, Saskia, and I'm not trying to open the last paper, but I would hope close to the adoption of the LTP, you have a debrief and you work out a plan for the next LTP because you've got your 1 year shorter.
Yes.
And they're going to be starting that on the
Yeah.
3rd of July or something.
Well, I mean, I think, well, actually, the best, who was I with? I forget now. One of my crowd, didn't have a good experience, and so they did a smart debrief, and they started planning, within a month of the old one being adopted.
Well, we was planning before we finished, so we've got a meeting on Monday, with our new corporate planner, to start talking about all the annual, report, LTP, et cetera, and what we have, planned, we haven't quite got it in the, diaries yet, is we're going to do a full staff debrief for those that were involved. So we're going to have a separate ELT one, and then have one without ELT there, which Paul and Amelia will lead, just to their experience, how they found it, what could be improved. Look, we definitely had challenges this time. We did lose our project manager halfway through. And so the core project group, we just sort of went and started to do our own things. It's gone okay, but definitely there's some areas for improvement in 2027. We'll do an end of training and review with elected members. So as part of that, elected member feedback on the process and from their perspective, what they would like to see for themselves if they stand again and get re-elected, or for the new elected members coming in for the 2027 RTP.
We were also rolling out a new finance system.
We were. There were many challenges.
Let's remember the horror.
District-wide
Just
funding.
crammed it all into that one very short space.
District-wide funding, we had to wait for that before we could start stuff. So it was a perfect storm. And I'm pretty proud that we're actually sitting here today with a document.
He's still smiling. It's a hysterical laugh. He's smiling.
While I'm not wanting to just, I don't want to appear like I'm going again it, because I think actually we've got to bring professionalism to the total document. I do struggle with years 3 to 9, not what you folk have prepared, but Tano, I think actually part of the debrief is how do you have that time to focus on what is the new council? The only thing out of this document that I would take for year 3 is I've got a rough idea what my opening balances would be. In other words, debt and assets are flying off to a multi-CCO or whatever you decide in the long run. But actually, what are you then? I mean, the numbers have to have some relevance. You've still got community assets, and roads, and bits and pieces. But actually, is that really what you guys are? I've struggled to think that actually we have got a position here that is the position you're taking into the new year. And so, new 10-year plan.
I think there's some real challenges around that, because if water goes on that date, what does that mean for council? What does it mean our core priorities are? How do we have that communication with our communities? Because one thing they've been really clear about is if all of that money disappears and the operational spend and all of that to water to a different CCO, we don't want you to then fill the gap with nice to have projects. So I like that Paul's talking about a great reset for, finances, and I don't want to make it seem like a really terrible thing, but I think there is going to be a conversation to have. Well, what does the council beyond year 3 look like? What is our priorities? What are we delivering on? What do our communities expect us to deliver on? And I think that's been the challenge with this plan, alongside that sentiment from the government. You're going to stick to your knitting. These are your core roles. But our community saying, well, these are our core roles as well, and this is what we expect of you. And trying to merge those two together has been more challenging this year than others.
It does make it feel like it's a transitional plan rather than plan, but I think, you know, I'm risking being, well, I don't know, something, a Philistine probably.
Well, to be fair, Bruce, that is how we had to treat it, is a transitional plan, given that it's going to be a significant structural change to the business.
Yeah. Good. No, that's really good. So it follows through. Look, so perhaps I just I don't want to say make this look too much like death warmed up. Let's just look at a couple of things. And actually, I want to come back to the land sales. Can I go to page 326? So what did I start there? This is our revenue and financing policy. I just want to check that I've got this right. Where are we? Where are we? Proceeds from sale of assets and lump sum contributions. Council does not collect revenue from these funding sources to fund operating costs.
Correct. And we did talk about this.
You know where I'm going, don't you?
At the last time we talked about, I think 31st of January or whatever that time. Your question to us was, are you using land sales to fund operational costs?
Well, I'm going to ask you to remind me what the sage answer was, because I just would like to make certain that we haven't got inconsistency within our LTP.
What did I say? I don't think we are,
because I just would like to match that then with gee whiz, the disclosure regs. We've got them at the front, haven't we? Sorry, I haven't got my page number on there. 24, is it 249? Because I had trouble last night with yeah, it is. Go to yeah, balanced budget, page 249, and the very interesting graph on page 250, which is the balanced budget excluding land sales. So can you remember your argument?
I can't remember
your argument. Because I just want to reconcile, you know, a very principled position, which we stayed on 326, with what we're actually doing. I mean, I know that the statutory balanced budget test isn't the tightest test on whether you are using capital or non-operating revenues to fund your operating, but at the level of you know, like 26, 27, 80, I mean, they're still quite up there, but 89, so we're 11% behind balancing next year, and we're going to make it up to land sales. I'm just struggling to believe that we aren't breaching our policy here.
Well, I think that the as you said, the balanced budget metric is close. And it does kind of allow you to do that. But the things where we won't be balancing the budget is things like we don't necessarily fund all of the depreciation, as Julie was talking about. We don't fund bridge depreciation. We have cut the funding of depreciation for the first 2 years on renewals in the Three Waters space. And we are debt funding that. They are capital expenditures, but because we don't fund all of the depreciation, that impacts, even though it's an operational cost being depreciation, but it's funneled towards capital spend. So I guess that's where I would sit on the argument here. I'm not sure that it's all funded depreciation, but there will be a significant portion of that which will be funded depreciation. Sorry, depreciation that we are not funding. So that, I think that's the argument that I put up last time.
And we also have two within our policy. So the proceeds from land sales, endowment land, can't be used to offset operational costs. They have to be used to invest in other types of assets that have long lives. So endowment land sales will fund the Cromwell Memorial Hall, $0.5 million bill. Majority of that will be funded out of land sales. Well, all of that except for grants. And so, you know, that's council's policy. So it's technically it's going into capital. It's not going into operating, but you know, I'm no accountant. But
Yeah,
we have some strict rules around it.
So I mean, look, to be honest, Peter, I just think, I hate to say it in the middle of this, I just think you need to tighten up on that to make certain, because firstly, you've got an exist, I know it's pointing, it's a bit of a caveat to suddenly start reading this on page C26, but you know, that is the principle, and yet the auditor's report and indeed our comments here make it look like we are using I won't call land sales capital income, but the benefit of that land out there to meet today's groceries, you know, which I don't think is the intention. So
No,
can I say, I think tightening up on that explanation would strike me as pretty important, because perhaps I'm saying in reading this, I didn't get it. And I think there is some risk that in reality we are either giving the impression, which is one thing, or even worse, we are using land sales to pay today's bills. Given this is a public session, I want to stress, I just do the work to find out and make certain it's right. I'm not saying that we are. It's not clear that that is the case. Okay, that's cool. I got that there.
But I did know that you were going to.
You did know that I'm going to ask that question. Okay. Which is fine. I'm trying to get where I'm trying to go from here. That probably was my big thing. Can I just ask a question? I mean, this is where, you know, I start, so I don't sort of rely on the out years. But now I'm going to ask you an out year question. I'm very interested in where you think that the new council will be at. Where's my, yeah. So I'm going now to page, where are we? Again, it's only me obtaining my pseudo intellectualism, page 258 and 259. Look at that situation in your LTP, where on 258, you've got cash of getting out to about 128 mil, or equivalents in 2033, 34, and we've got debt of $8.1 million. Now that may be true, but our treasury position won't be that, will it? We won't have any debt.
Well, the issue with that is most of that cash and the cash equivalents comes from land sales, which are endowment land.
Okay.
Which are effectively earmarked for,
back to Peter's point.
Yeah, for use in Cromwell, which we have other expenditure that we can't use that cash for. So it's really earmarked for use in Cromwell. And if we don't have the necessary projects going in to chew that up, then it will sit there and build up.
Really?
Which is a problem for how that works, because we're borrowing on the one hand, with massive cash reserves on the other. So,
but yeah, so
it's not necessarily a bad problem to have.
No, it's still a problem. I think there are many councils, Tamer, that would love to have this gun sheet that you know that's got it. So all I'm reflecting, I'm not trying to be a shady dealer here, but in terms of treasury management, are we able to use endowment reserve funds? Use is the wrong word. In our treasury management, we're going to have a lot of cash in the bank and we're going to have some debt. Are we able to not have no debt? In other words, no interest costs? In other words, to pay down, not to pay down, we've got to be careful, because it's not getting rid of it. It's just saying that at a point in time, surplus funds that have come through from endowment monies will mean that we have no debt balance.
I'm not sure, and I take a legal opinion here, but I think my understanding of endowment land is the proceeds from endowment is used in the area that it is endowed.
No, I know it's used. I'm not saying it won't be available at the right time. But
to repay it, I think to repay it for projects that we may have done outside of the endowment area would be a breach in the endowment. So that's something we've got to work our way through and get an understanding of what that actually means.
Can we still use how we have in the past, that internal loan function?
Well, that's simple. I mean, my point is, I want to stress, you're not estranging the endowment funds for the purpose in which they have been realised and collected, but it's just until you need that money for whatever is a legitimate purpose, our treasury management presumably enables us to use that to have no, literally to have no debt. In other words, it's internal loan. I know, so
yeah.
I'm taking this into an area that doesn't need to be resolved today.
Well, we have been thinking about that, and the issue for us now is that the benefit, because we've districtised most of
That's
our
right.
rates, so any internal loans that we would use would have a district impact.
Yeah.
So the benefit that you would generate from using the money here means that the district having to pay it, so there's no.
Yes, you're right, how do you protect the endowment itself, given it should be expecting interest income? Okay, that's a good point. You know, somewhere, like, I don't think, I honestly, because it's such a transition, I wouldn't do it, but I could argue it wouldn't be helpful, it wouldn't be bad to explain why we're going to have $128 million in cash. I mean, people are saying, come on, Peter, give me a rates break. We don't have rates next year. I mean, that's more than our rates taken in 1 year.
I suspect the mayor and the chief executive at that time would have written to the minister, but only the minister can change the purpose of the endowment.
Yeah.
Alleviate some of this imbalance.
No, I understand that. I think what I'm trying to say for this LTP, Peter, it'd be wise to at least have in your back pocket. Why are we, even though, as I've said, I place limited reliance for a whole bunch of reasons around these outer numbers. Why would we plan to have $128 million in cash and $8 million in debt? In fact, I mean, I think the first, why will we have $128 million in cash? Number one is the first real question. But then the second question is, why would we then have debt? So, and you've given me good answers, but I just wonder whether perhaps equipping you, Tamar, and your councillors with that argument might be useful somewhere down the track. I don't know how much the community or even any submissions that you might get would be focusing that far out, to be honest. It's probably low risk, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. We're credit rated now. Yes, we are. Will we keep that up once we get rid of the waters?
There's a certain talking point, and Paul can talk to this, where it's actually in our advantage. We keep a credit rating because we of course get the lower interest rates, but at a certain point, if our debt levels are so low that it's actually costing us, we would get rid of it. But
the convention for it's about 60,000 a year to maintain a rating. And you probably have to have about, the old numbers were around about 50 million debt to justify it.
We went down the track of a credit rating to make sure that our capital spend could be achieved if we were bringing everything for the 9 years for everything. And it may be that we do not need that beyond year 2 of the LTP. So, brilliant.
Okay. The only thing that I had, and I don't know whether I can hopefully I can sort of marshal my thoughts here, Julie, which possibly is really a QP question, other than suggesting go find them and bring them in. I'm just interested in the NZTA funding, which is of course affecting the roading side. And in effect, I think we're noting our focus ultimately becomes given the way the funding is going on maintenance and not CapEx.
Yeah, so I can't tell you the detail, but I know generally. So obviously every time there's a change in government and new government policy statement and transport is written. And so it's very hard to do long-term plans when they change it every 3 months. And so that becomes a challenge because they absolutely change the priorities based on what the priorities of the coalition governments are. And so that's where you see footpaths are funded, our footpaths are not funded because you had a coalition with the Green Party, and you have a coalition seeing footpaths as important for sustainable transport options as important. So I think the reality is though, what I used to do was I knew that the only thing that you line really weren't looking at and was the operations and maintenance program line in the government policy statement. And if you looked at what it was in previous years compared to what they were proposing and you calculated what the percentage increase was, then you knew that that's how much money
Yeah.
extra was going into the road pot that was going to be divvied out across all of New Zealand. NZTA traditionally do not go into specific councils and cut them. They basically apply that percentage reasonably evenly across everybody. They don't go into one and say, well, you've actually had a big slush fund than the others. We're not giving you any increase, but these guys can have more. So if you look at that, you can get a feel for where it's heading. And then you cut your program to suit. I think that's getting more challenging. I think that there's almost councils now looking at whether they start to fund parts of their programs without subsidy.
It's interesting actually. I now found out it was page 251. It's the essential services benchmark where we are so far under matching our depreciation, and as we've been their profile, as we've said there, this right, because that's where it's really raised that actually our CapEx spend is substantially reduced, and we are, the future focus is on maintaining what we have.
Well, the challenge there, and that's I raised this when I was in the efficiency group. We're funding depreciation based on what the life cycle analysis is, but the NZTA subsidy for the renewal programs doesn't match the New Zealand transport assets depreciation profile. And so this is where you get New Zealand-wide backlogs of infrastructure deficits because everybody's sitting on their renewal programs because they can't get the matching subsidy to do it. So you're either doing it without subsidy, which then brings the whole philosophy that all the councils approach is they only fund the local share proportion of the depreciation, because with the basis that they're going to get subsidy on the other half, kind of calls that philosophy into question of the government and not matching it.
So this is one of those areas, Tamar, that worries me about the new council, because that essential services benchmark is essentially the one that you will take on with the new council, which is the inability with the current funding model to maintain roads. You'll struggle with bridges, and you'll increasingly struggle with reseals and rehabs and all those sorts of things. That's one graph that I get worried about. Not thinking about the new council because I'm not suggesting you can't get rid of your three. You can get rid of your three waters at the moment. This is why actually I go back to the new council, Peter. There may be things that we start to think about relative to three, what we're learning out of three waters. I saw the letter from the minister, Mr. Watts, yesterday. Was that Tuesday that came out or something like that? Tuesday. And it's their metric was all about not equivalence of funding, but actually playing with the contract. Playing with the contract is a terrible phrase. Working with contractors, being able to have the size and scale to get the command the effort, etc. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of that actually, because it's relevant for us as a major owner of roads. Okay, I think we're probably done enough on this. Is there anything? Well, perhaps I should first say, like, again, you've let me have a bit of fun and games with the LTP. Well done, by the way. I can actually say I've gone through it more or less. I was interested in the. You can see I was interested in the revenue and financing policy and how we were planning to fund. I wouldn't want to glide over the risk assumption and risks that we've looked at before in our committee, and of course I also have to look at the pictures at the end to see who's in council. Is there any comments you guys want to have about this at this stage? We're only releasing this to the auditor, and perhaps you might say we spend a lot of time, but is there anything that you guys want to say at this stage? Well, clearly, as well as you, Sally, I'm conscious of you as well at this point.
I think you probably hit the nail on the head with a transitional plan, and we're not even confirmed as a transitional plan, but that's kind of the direction it needs to take. Which makes it challenging. There are some big conversations coming. Not least of, the end of this month when we talk about is this going to remain? We'll be looking at a CCO with that water out from year 3. If it comes back in, God, I'd hate to see it away.
Well, I started with looking back, looking forward, and I thought actually, if there's one thing we hold on to, a lot of good stuff that you've done in the course of the last 3 years. So, yeah, okay. That's good. Rightio. I don't sense there's any other points. It's been really useful. We have a very simple thing that the report be received, but I just wonder whether in fact we needed to just change that resolution. I think we essentially are agreeing that this be released to the auditor. Audit, I think, is actually the point really of the meeting. So, look, could I suggest, Sarah, that we actually have two recommendations. A, or one, I don't know which way we do it here, that the report be received, and two, the committee agree. I don't think, because you're not going to have a council meeting over this, but the committee agrees the draft LTP let's say, it may not be this word, but be submitted to audit.
So, at the deliberations meeting, we did attach the full document, Bruce, and had approval from council, subject to the edits on the deliberations, outcomes.
Yeah.
For it to be released to audit.
Okay, so we need to do it.
Well, I suppose there's no harm is that, the committee has also reviewed it.
Yeah.
And agrees that it should be released.
Well, I think what we do
Yeah.
is, sorry,
Yeah.
Sarah's going to go nuts in the head. Why don't we just confirm council's decision to release this draft for audit? So it's not trying to in any way do anything different other than saying you made a good call, council.
And can we put that, subject to the amendments agreed by council?
Amendments agreed.
Yeah, amendments agreed, yeah.
Rightio, that's good. And then that also means professionally, I think it's useful that Chantel and her team know that it's had everybody's tick off, which is good.
We have changed the format a little bit in that. You would remember from the last one, all of the financials were in the one spot. What we've done is put the financials relevant to the sections in those spots, so you can see a complete picture.
Very good. Okay, so we're affirming the decision made by council and we're receiving the report. We're receiving it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can I suggest, sorry, can I suggest I do that? Because this is the committee. I think you want to, if we just have the independence name in that motion. Not a bad thing. So can I second it? Thanks, Tanya. Sorry about that. I should have made that clear. I probably best do it that way. But I think given on the third wheel here, it's probably not a bad thing that I say it's good to go. Okay, so I'll put that motion, all those motions, all those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Rightio. What is the final bit to get us out of this meeting? Yes, which I haven't actually even looked at. But it's been confirmed. I'm pretty conscious I've got that in my diary, but never know with me. I've got a mindset. I think this is one that we changed, wasn't it?
Yes.
Because we were going to, did I ask for, or did you ask? I can't remember.
I think you asked.
You asked.
Did I ask? Did I ask?
We're going to 6.
That's right.
Yeah.
Monday morning. Yes.
Yeah, okay. You're not on the 6th?
And,
No,
so,
okay, 16th is fine with me.
but Bruce, we've just got some, slight, staffing changes. So David Scoones is going to be overseas, so I'm going to be overlooking his group. So Paul's going to be in my seat, so Paul will happily sit there.
getting used to the role.
Exactly, he'll be happily sitting here on the 16th as lead officer.
In that case, I must expect a high standard, Paul. Well, I've got to have it from Saskia, so there we go.
Music changes, everybody swaps seats.
Okay, well, so look, it'll be the 16th. Send a resolution on that, but that's good. Look forward to that. Let's end the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's been very useful. And with the meeting closed, is there anything else we should discuss before I leave and let you guys go on today?
How's the local water done moderately well tracking up north and the other councils? Are they joining to get some of
No.
the